Hello and welcome to Retro 48K for another modern review of a game with a retro heart. If you haven't realised by now, I love a good Metroid style game, especially a proper old school one with rich lore, detailed pixel art graphics, and Blasphemous is all that and much more. But is it worth your time, and does it have enough mass appeal to, well, appeal to everyone? Let's find out as I review it on the PC. Blasphemous was developed as a Kickstarter actually back in 2017 and was finally released in 2019 on most platforms including the Switch, PlayStation 4, Xbox. So I'm a little late to the party with this one. It was developed by a Spanish-based studio called The Game Kitchen and published by Team 17, and that Spanish origins shows in a lot of its influences, most of the game's lore and art being steeped in the kind of religious iconography you might expect from Catholicism, and in particular the Spanish Inquisition. Cue the Monty Python reference here.
So I didn't expect a kind of Spanish Inquisition. Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition.
The game sees you play as the Penitent One, a silent knight from the Brotherhood of the Silent Sorrow, and you must travel the land after being reborn by the grievous miracle on a pilgrimage in search of the truth behind said miracle and its mysteries. And this basically involves you hacking and slashing your way through the game's various areas, collecting items and religious artifacts that then allow you to progress further in true Metroidvania fashion as you unravel the secrets of everything. And along the way you'll be met by some of the poor inhabitants of these lands, both cursed and blessed by the miracle, although to be honest most of the blessings seem like a curse if you ask me, as you slowly piece together what's happening in this world and your place within it. And from a story point of view, the premise alone was intriguing enough to keep me going through the entire game, with the deep religious iconography steeped in every aspect of the game's design down to enemies and environments. It all felt very intriguing and I just wanted to find out what was going on. But even if you stripped that away, I still feel the game did a great job of just giving you enough information to keep you pushing on, as each new character you meet really gives you more questions than answers until you finally get to that final showdown, which I won't spoil here. In terms of gameplay, it's a Metroidvania pure and simple. However, the core combat is simple but satisfying. You have a basic attack which can be upgraded of course, and then you have a parry and a block to deflect attacks, and then a dodge which can be combined with attack through various power-ups and then be unlocked and upgraded. All standard stuff. And a correct parry of a timed attack will also grant you more damage, or even in some cases a correctly timed attack will allow you to finish off your opponent with a gruesome finishing move. And then you add on top of that various spells that you can do to get out of difficult spots or deal massive damage. It really is a decent combat system. Bit disappointingly, there are no other weapons other than the sword you start with, but it can be upgraded and combat is kept fresh by the game, allowing you to equip various hearts, relics, rosary beads, all again fitting in that theme that grant bonuses and new abilities, and also by the enemies themselves that have wildly different attack patterns that you have to learn and get used to and are always interesting to fight. So due to all this, the combat is really rewarding, and defeating enemies actually grants you the game's currency tiers of atonement, which can be either spent on combat upgrades or at the game's shops to either buy items or upgrades themselves. The difficulty of combat builds on that reward too, as it's not a particularly easy game, and to get through some of the more difficult sections you will either have to master the dodge and parry, or search around for every bile flask, which are the flasks that refill your health, just to keep yourself topped up and able to just soak up damage. And I will particularly highlight some of the bosses are great in this game. They range from one-on-one dualistic fights to more massive bosses with these weird floating heads with powers. Everyone feels unique and is really interesting to fight, and you have a nice little build up as you get there, as there'll be a character waiting who will offer you help if you are struggling. And in a nod to Hollow Knight and perhaps more Dark Souls, death in this game just sees you return to the last checkpoint you passed, but you do lose some of your mana capacity in this game called religious fervour, and your reward for killing enemies will be reduced until you get back to that point you died and collect your sins back again as your guilt. This makes death less of a problem, however it does mean that often getting back to where you died can be the problem in itself, and it also kind of borrows that Dark Souls philosophy that every time you pray at one of these checkpoints to actually mark the checkpoint, all nearby enemies are respawned, but at least the checkpoint does renew all your health and magic powers and everything as well. So there is a nice balance to that. And speaking of balance, the game has a really nice flow to it, something often difficult in Metroid style games. I never felt that I was particularly stuck, not knowing where to go or what to do, but I also never felt that I was being led by the nose either. Exploration feels very natural and rewards players who are observant with the game's many hidden passages. And this is all thanks to some great map design with shortcuts back to areas that you've unlocked naturally, along with a well-judged difficulty that made traversal much easier later on, but often entering a new area, it presented a decent challenge on my first time through. The game itself has some real depth to it in terms of lore and the world, and they're so intertwined with this bleak and oppressive tone throughout, which extends to the visuals. You've got some absolutely gorgeous pixel art, animations and enemy designs all wrapped together in this lore, and it just looks brilliant. And this world is probably not a place that you would want to visit, but it is a place that you feel compelled to explore and know more about. The visuals add to that flow that I mentioned earlier too, with areas being very distinct, with each seeming to fit within its place in the world, with sort of rural Spanish towns you start off with giving way to snowy peaks or these monstrous monasteries, all of which are brought together wonderfully by an excellent soundtrack that mixes up each area nicely, while again fitting with that bleak and oppressive tone of the game. If I had to pick a fault with the game, it would be that while places and people are visually memorable, as a good Metroidvania should be, often the names of things and people aren't. When you're on a quest and you receive an item, you have to check the menu to see whether that was a quest item or have you been given a relic or an ability. It's not immediately obvious what you've just picked up, and that isn't a big issue in itself because you can just check the menu to see what you've picked up. No harm, no foul. But I would be often so struck by the visuals, I would miss characters' names, and when it did ask you to go back to a character to complete a quest, if that was slightly off the beaten path, I would often forget which character matched which name and end up having to visit a few. So it's not hugely negative, but it did hamper that flow that I was talking about earlier slightly. And while also not a negative for me, some might be put off by that bleak tone of the game. Despite the heavy Christian influences, there's no mercy here. Almost every character looks in complete pain and torment thanks to the blessings of the miracle, and I could imagine it just puts some off with its relentless nature. But again, I didn't find that too bad an issue. I easily sunk 20 hours into this and enjoyed every minute of it. I could also poke holes in some of the voice acting too, as some of the words aren't pronounced correctly, but it's weird because some words are pronounced correctly in one place and they're not correctly in another. But to be honest, this was developed by a team in Spain, so I'm willing to give them a free pass on that. It's not a big budget release that has massive amounts of people doing the localization there. And it didn't happen too often. It was just the odd occurrence really stood out because of how infrequent it was. So should you play it? Well, yes, basically. If you like Metroid games, this is one of the best in a sea of them that seem to be getting released these days. Don't be fooled by the stark landscapes and tortured, rotten world of sin that it paints, that this is just a Dark Souls wannabe in 2D. There's far more to it than that. And after a short time with the game, you will see that this game feels completely unique and stands on its own. The combat is fast and rewarding with excellent enemy design that keeps things interesting. It looks beautiful even with some of the more horrific elements on screen. That pixel art covers up some of that you probably wouldn't get away with in a 3D game. And there's plenty of secrets hidden away in there, including a second ending that means it should keep you coming back for more. punishment at the hands of the grievous miracle. And with that said, it brings me to the end of my review. And as always with my reviews, I do like to hear back from you. Has anyone played this? What are your thoughts on the game? Does it interest you if you haven't played it? Is it one that you're looking out for on a sale or anything like that? I would love to hear back from you all. And with that said, then that kind of brings me to the end. So as always, I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, please drop it a like. And if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really does help us out. And with all that said, all that's left to say is I'm Retro48K, and I'll see you next time.